Hello, this is the Truth Seeker 333. This is video number 2.4.1.9. Complete review of the title L in Strong's Concordance, reference Strong's Concordance number H410. We are picking up at Job chapter 9, verse 2. And the last verse we looked at was Job chapter 8, verse 20. So Job 9, verse 2 in the King James Version. I know it is so of a truth, but how should man be just with God? And in the Hebrew, it is pronounced Im El. Im El. And it means with God. Okay, and again, the usage here is of a generic title for God, which is not designated as a name but a title. So Job chapter 12, verse 6. The tabernacles of robbers prosper, and they that provoke God are secure, into whose hand God bringeth abundantly. Okay, notice that the word God is in this verse twice. The first usage of the word God, title God, is El, and the translation for they that provoke God in the Hebrew is Lemar Gizeh El. Lemar Gizeh El. Okay? And the other God that appears, the other word for God that appears in this verse is the word Eloah. So let's take a look at that. You'll notice that I spell it Eloah with the V in parentheses because it's a Vav with the dot over it. So let's take a look at the interlinear real quick to compare the two. And here's the first phrase that we looked at, Lemar Gizeh El, and we see the other word here for God, Eloah. Eloah. So essentially we start out with a generic title for God, El, and then we narrow it down to a more descriptive term, Eloah. And I talked a little bit about how I believe the term Eloah is representative of a national God. But I do want to get into the study of that term a little bit more because I am very intrigued by the Vav with the Cholam, the Cholam character above it. Because it is a connecting character in the Hebrew, but most likely I will be getting into this term as well. But this is sort of this. We see this in the variation phrase Elohei Yisrael. So you see that translation is God of Israel. So you see you see where I'm speculating that this term is related to the national God of Israel. This is the God of this people. That kind of idea. Whereas El, it could be a God here, it could be a God there. We could be referencing the God Ha'el, but it's not like Eloah, which is a more distinctive term, which I'm very intrigued by. So, and notice in the English, we don't know that there are two different Hebrew words. We just know that the word God appears twice. And so we're like, you don't know until you look at the Hebrew. Oh, okay, well, this says El here. But on the last phrase, it says Eloah, you know, and that's a Hebrew parallelism where they're drawing one word in parallel with another word, making the two words and phrases synonymous. Okay, so let's move on to the next verse. Job chapter 13, verse 3. Surely I would speak to the Almighty, and I desire to reason with God. And in the Hebrew, it's actually unto God, you know, but in the King James Version, they translate it with God, which is curious because with God is actually Im El, and I think we saw that up here, you know, on Job chapter 9, verse 2, Im El. So that when we come down to Job chapter 13, verse 3, we see the same English translation with God, but instead it's El, okay? Unto God is a more accurate translation. So the two words are tied together with a dash symbol, which is from the Masoretic text. Originally that was not there in all likelihood. And again, the three dots under the aleph is the sagol, which gives us the vowel sound of an E and an H. El. Okay? Now the two dots under the aleph is the tsure, in which we get the vowel sound A. Okay? So this is more of like a ale, kind of spelled A-L-E, ale, you know? So then it's just sort of like pronounced ale, okay? So unto God, and also unto the Almighty, it says Shaddai. So the other God word in this verse is Shaddai. And my comment is, note the play of words, you know, in the same verse with El Shaddai, unto Almighty. So taking a look at it in the transliteration, we can see the Hebrew parallelism in the first part, El Shaddai. Now this is not El Shaddai, you know, like God Almighty. This is unto the Almighty, okay? You know, it can get confusing with the two characters, Aleph and Lamed, as being used for another word, but this is the case. It's unto the Almighty, and then we see the same usage here, unto God, okay, where they say with God, you know, conveying the idea in the English language. So we see the L there, we see the L there, and basically drawing these two words together as synonymous with one another. Okay? All right, next verse. Job chapter 13, verse 7. Will ye speak wickedly for God, and talk deceitfully for him? And the operative phrase in this verse is for God. Okay? In the Hebrew, they are translating this as Hal-el. Hal-el. Okay? And it's interesting because the two dots under the Lamed, as you can see right, oh, let's move this back here. The two dots under the Lamed is a Shavah, which a lot of times when we see that, we tie it together with the first character. In other words, Hal. Okay. I suppose in some cases there might be some pronunciations such as Halel. But I guess, if you're saying it quickly, it's just Halel. Okay. And the Hay character with the patak under it. What I learned in my first preliminary Hebrew course, which I never finished, but I am working on other Hebrew courses, and we're all learning here. So, but I'm just sharing this, and people can correct me if I'm wrong. But that character in the front there is noting a directive or a movement toward the object, which in this case is God, and then le, of course, is the prefix which means to. Okay, so in the English King James version, we're translating it for God. Will the wicked speak? Will ye speak wickedly for God? But the literal translation is more accurately thought of as toward to God. Will you speak wickedly toward to God? I know that's not correct English, but it gives you an image of, are you speaking wickedly at God? Are you speaking wickedly? And in this case, they're saying for God, but I think it's more accurately understood as speaking wickedly at God. But I'm not a translator, so, but that's just what my opinion is right now. So my note here is basically that it is difficult to translate this passage into English because literally this means, toward to God. The use of the definite article ha is denoting the movement toward God, understood as for toward God, possibly also a play on the title Ha-El, the God, but also using the function of the ha with the meaning toward. So quite an interesting use of prefixes with the title El. Hal-El, not Ha-El, but Hal-El. Okay? And moving on, Job 13, verse 8. Will ye accept this? Will you accept his person? Will ye contend for God? Again, we see in the English translation for God, so you would assume, oh, same usage, right? No. In the Hebrew, im la'el. Im la'el. Okay? And of course we know im, meaning with, la or le. This is la in this case. It's got the chametz, la, ale. Okay? So I'm looking at this as a literal translation of with for God. Okay? Even though that doesn't make sense, but that's the literal translation. With for God. Okay? And so same kind of a thing, trying to come up with an English translation that best conveys the idea from the Hebrew. All right, let's take a look at the time. Let's see how I'm doing on time. Okay, good. Job chapter 15, verse 4. Yea, thou castest off fear and restrainest prayer before God. And the operative phrase before God in the Hebrew is le pani, or le panei el. Le panei el. Okay? And I have translated this for before God. For before God. Because le is for, and pani is face, or it's a surface or face, and L, so to face God, or for face of God, or to face God. And in the English we're just saying before God, or conveying the idea of standing before God. And my note is just like, note that pani is the same word for face, which gives an image of to face of God, or rather restraining prayer in front of God's face. Note also the use of Eloah in Job chapter 15, verse 8. Okay, Eloah. So we'll take a look at that briefly in the interlinear, skipping down to verse 8. So in verse, we just got through with verse 4, and we'll go down to verse 8, and we see the word, well, no, that's not it. Here it is, Eloah. Okay, and in the English, have thou heard the secret of God? Eloah. And dost thou restrain wisdom to thyself? So up here in verse 4, yea, thou castest off fear and restrainest prayer before God. Le pani el, before God. But then down here, 4 verses later, in the use of the word God, they're using the word Eloah. Okay? So, the titles of the Lord are very numerous, and they're all used in as synonyms to one another, and they're switched out according to different reasons. It could be meter, it could be rhyming, it could be to convey a certain definite meaning of what kind of God is our God, that kind of a thing. So in the English, we just see the word God, but in the Hebrew, we don't know. Is it El? Is it Eloah? Is it Elohim? Is it Elohei? So we're not getting that flavor in the English. We don't know. We don't know. We just see the word God and we think, oh, that's just El or something. It's not El in all cases. And okay, so let's move on to Job chapter 15, verse 11. Are the consolations of God small with thee? Is there any secret thing with thee? The operative phrase, consolations of God. In the Hebrew, tanchu mot el. Tanchu mot el. Consolations of God. Okay. Also, I'm saying note the use of Eloah in Job 15:8. That's the one we just looked at. because we're seeing the title El here in verse 11. But just, 3 verses prior, they use the title Eloah. Okay? And Job chapter 15, verse 13. That thou turnest thy spirit against God, and lettest such words go out of thy mouth. And the highlighted phrase is against God. In the Hebrew it is el. And you'll recall previously we were saying this means unto God. Okay? In Job 13 verse 3, it's translated unto God. Okay? Unto God. But in Job 15 verse 13, it's translated against God. Against God. Okay? So we're going with the understanding that in the context of the Hebrew, we are understanding this as, well, the idea of unto God is actually conveying against God, okay? Because of the context. Because it's not a one-to-one relationship with Hebrew to English, okay? So this gives you a better understanding of like what this word really means in the Hebrew. El, okay? Unto, against, okay? We have words like that in English too, where depending on the context, the word will change its meaning. And that's what it is in this case as well. El, against God. And my note is note that el can be translated as to. I should say not ale, but E-H-L, ale. So let me just make that change real quick there. Ale. I use a capital L, so you know it's an L. Can be translated as to, into, towards, or against. Also note the use of Eloah. Again, note that in chapter 15, verse 8. Okay, moving on. Chapter 15 of Job, verse 25. For he stretcheth out his hand against God, and strengtheneth himself against the Almighty. Again, we see that same phrase, el, against God. And in this verse, we see also the God word Shaddai, Almighty. And my note the play between El and the El Shaddai. Okay, unto God and unto Almighty. And El in this verse is in reference to Shaddai. Okay, so let's just look at the interlinear, and you can just see it with your own eyes. We can see the Hebrew parallelism here. El, and then we see the El Shaddai. Okay, but the operative phrase is El, as in unto or against, and the same here, El, unto or against. So in here it's against God in the generic sense, and then we're using the connector, which is the vav, which is translated as and then El, against, and against Shaddai, Almighty. Okay, not against El Shaddai, God Almighty, but just Almighty. and against Almighty, as it's translated up here, against the Almighty. So again, starting off with the generic title El, and then in the second phrase narrowing itself of a more descriptive term of God as the Almighty, Shaddai. Okay? And again, we'll go over that title Shaddai. That's just the most popular translation for Shaddai, Almighty. And I'm going to have another video specifically for Shaddai, but it's going to be much later on after we get through a lot of other things, maybe a year from now or something. But, excuse me. Okay, so let's move on. Let's see how much time, how am I doing on the time here? Let's see. Okay, we got a little more time. Okay, let's go to Job chapter 16, verse 11. God hath delivered me unto the ungodly, and turned me over into the hands of the wicked. The highlighted phrase is, God hath delivered me. Okay. And in the Hebrew, Yaskireni, Yaskireni El. Yaskireni El. And if anybody wants to correct me on how to say that, go right ahead, because I'm learning just like everybody else. But my understanding is the Shava under the Samech ties it together with the Yod. So Yas, and then you have the Gemel with the Kirik, and then you have Gi, and then the Resh with the Tzureh, and Reni, Yaskireni El. God hath delivered me. Okay? I have no note on this one. It's just using the generic title El. And I think we can, well, let's do one more. We'll do one more verse. And chapter 18, verse 21. Surely such are the dwellings of the wicked, and this is the place of him that knoweth not God. And it in the Hebrew is Lo Yada El. Lo Yada El. That knoweth not God. Lo is not. Yada is knoweth. And God, El. Okay? And I have no note there, so I think we're going to end it right there at Job 18, verse 21. God bless you all, and keep seeking truth.